Hi, hi, hi. I hope you are doing well today. I am glad to be here yet another day to share and to just go deeper into the story of Esther. I hope you've been able to catch up with the two previous episodes that are related to the book of Esther. If you haven't, please take time, just look at that as we prepare to dive deeper into the book of Esther. So last time we looked at chapter 1, and today I want us to dive straight into chapter 2, the second chapter of the book of Esther. This chapter starts with another dramatic first verse. It says, "Later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her." Basically, he missed her. This guy missed his wife, missed his former queen Vashti, who he had banished because he had requested her to come. Not even requested, he had commanded her to come in the presence of his visitors so that he could display her beauty. But she refused. She was uncomfortable, and because of that, he was angered and banished her from his presence. Never again was she allowed to come back. But at this point in time, he's lonely. But of course, because this guy, remember, he has power, he has prestige, he has property. Guys are working around the clock to ensure that whatever issues this guy has, there's a solution to it. And so this is what the guys said. They stated this solution for his problem. They said, "Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be done for beautiful young virgins for the king." Verse 3 says, "The king appointed commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them." Verse 4 says, "Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. So basically, the king was lonely, and now there was a vacancy. There was a vacancy for the queen. I don't know how that sounds, but it sounds very weird to imagine that such a position as a queen will be vacant because this guy didn't want the queen to appear as if to have offended him, to have disobeyed him. And so because of his pride and ego and the drunkenness, if you remember the verse, in the previous chapter, verse 10 talked about that he was in high spirits, he was drunk, and because of that he had made a decision, so she will be banished away. And now there is a vacancy because of that, and people around the king, his advisors, his eunuchs, are working around the clock to provide him with a solution to getting a queen, not Vashti, but a different one. And this is basically the whole story of chapter 2. They are working back to back to get girls from all over the kingdom to be brought to the harem in the citadel of Susa. The harem basically was a household of wives, concubine, and female servants of the king. So basically that's where they all resided, where they all stayed, where they all did their things. And so the girls will be brought from around the kingdom. Again, don't forget this kingdom has 127 provinces, and it's big from Kush, this is in Africa, to India. So there are many girls with from many ethnicities being brought to the king. But among these girls, we introduced to one of them who we only know of. And this in chapter 5, verse 5 rather, we're told of the girl who is called Hadassah. She is a cousin to Mordecai. And Mordecai was a man who had come all the way from Israel when the Babylonians had taken over Jerusalem. And he had come and he had taken residence, and he had started residing in Susa. And so therefore, Esther was a cousin to him. As you are told, Esther did not have any parents. Her father and mother were dead. She was an orphan. And Mordecai, her cousin, had taken her and had raised her. From what he said in verse 5 to 7, basically it's as if Mordecai was was older than Esther, and so basically he was the caregiver, like a parent figure to her. Again, we are told something else that is very interesting. She was a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, so she was not part of the local people in Susa. Basically, she was a foreigner in Susa. And after that, she goes, and we are told in verse 8 to 9 that when Esther went, when she was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to a guy who was in charge of the harem, so she's brought there with the other ladies to stay there, as were being prepared to meet the king. Then this is what verse 9 says, a very important thing: the girl pleased him and won his favor. So Esther won this guy called Hegai's favor, who was the one in charge of the harem. And this is what it says. Immediately, he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. So basically, Esther steps into this harem, and the guy looks at her and is like, wow, this girl is amazing. I like this girl. Basically, favor in this context of this story means goodness and kindness, that which is received from man. And so Esther receives this kindness and goodness from Haggai, and he gives whatever needs to be given to her so that she can start the preparation process. And I like the fact that Esther found favor in the eyes of this man. Again, let's not forget, Esther is an orphan. Esther is a foreigner. In fact, if anything, she should have been the last one on that list, because if anything goes by, they should have favored the people from within the citadel of Susa, those who were born and bred there, those who were originally who are descendants of the people from there. But that is not the case. She found favor in the eyes of Haggai. But another important thing that we are told in verse 10 that will play a role in the subsequent chapters is she was told by Mordecai, her cousin, not to display her nationality, not to say where she was from. Maybe at that point in time there was fear, because if you're a Jew, you would have been kicked out, because again you are not from there. They don't want to intermarry and to bring people who are captives into the royal family. There could have been all those speculations. So Mordecai, in his wisdom, tells her to shush, anyamaze, and she doesn't go saying that she's from Israel. So that happened, and the story continues. And then we are told about the process. So the process basically meant that this girl who had been brought into the harem, Esther and the rest, had to take a 12-month beauty treatment before meeting the king. Basically, you had to prepare for a whole year before meeting the king. It's like telling you we are meeting next year on a day like today for a date, and so you have the whole year to prepare for yourself for this one date. Again, it's a date where you're not certain whether you'll be chosen. You might go there and the king's like, no, I don't want to continue further and pursue this relationship. And how it was done, the meeting with the king was that the girls would go one by one in the evening, and the next morning they would leave. Again, depending on whether he had liked you or not, then he would now say whether you are to become queen. And so that was the process. Again, whatever is in this story, let me just say this as Christians, it is there for us to learn and not to say this is how we need to do things. I don't think God would allow us in any way to partake of the things King Xerxes partook of, but again, it was the culture at that time, and God was working in that culture. Not to mean that he had allowed it, but he was working within it. Let's not forget that these guys were not worshippers of Yahweh, were not worshippers of the God, our God, the God of Esther. And so basically, God was working in and through that. Again, the takeout from last time was that God is power. He can work in and through anything to achieve his glory, to achieve his will. And as we go on in verse 15, I want us to start from verse 15 and just read down what it says. When the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. Let's now hear what it says. The last sentence of that verse says, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. The second time we see Esther getting favor. The first time she got favor with Haggai, the eunuch who was in charge of the harem, and this second time she gets favor in the eyes of everyone she came across, everyone who saw her. Basically, from when she left the harem to when she came to the king's palace, everyone was just looking at her with a certain goodness, with a certain kindness that can only be born in the hearts of men through the power of God at work in our hearts. And so I look at that and I am amazed. And then we are told this. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of the reign. And so if you remember, the first chapter started 3 years when King Xerxes was ruling, and this is 7 years later. So this process had taken a long time. And to imagine, you took 12 months to prepare to meet the king, and maybe he had over millions or hundreds or millions, because this kingdom had many people, or girls who had been just brought to meet him. So basically this took long, and so Esther is coming in at the 7th time. And let me just say this in passing, I think sometimes God's timing is the best, because if you imagine it, they would have wanted to start early and finish early, but God knew why this process had to take so long. Actually, it's like about 4 years since Queen Vashti had been banished, because if you read the first verse, it talks about in the 3rd year of King Xerxes' reign, and this is the 7th year. So basically 4 years have passed, but no queen has been found fit enough to replace Vashti. And that's where Esther comes in. And at that time, God allows Esther to be seen. And I remember a quote that says, God is never late, never is he too early, he is always on time. And at this point in time, I see that at play, because many girls would have come as beautiful as Esther, even more beautiful than Esther, but none of them saw this favor Esther saw. And it goes on to tell us, and this is verse 17, now the king was attracted to Esther more than any other woman, and she won his favor and approval, more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. An amazing end to that process. So finally, 4 years later, Esther has been crowned as queen. And what I love about this part is this. Esther was not crowned because she did anything extra special. If you read, we are told that she just did what everyone else did. She came into the harem, took the 12-month beauty treatment and whatever she was going through, and when the time came for her to see the king, she could have the opportunity to bring anything she wanted, but she just took what everyone else was taking, the bare minimum. But she went, and when she went in to see the king, she found favor in the eyes of the king and in the eyes of everyone else who she met. And I pray this for us as we read this. May that favor of the Lord be upon us. Again, this is not the favor God gives directly, but this is favor that is seen through men, because it's a kind of favor seen, a loving, a kindness that is seen between men. But again, as I said earlier, it is conceived by the hands of God. It is conceived by the mind of God. It is conceived by God's working in the hearts of men. May God allow you to be favored beyond your imagination. Esther was among the many girls presented to the king, but she was the one who came out on top, not because of anything she had done, as I was saying earlier, but solely because God was with her. I remember when we started this book, we said one of the things about the book of Esther that has made it a book that is disputed for years and for ages and for centuries is the fact that it does not outwardly and overtly mention the name of God, the name of Yahweh. But we see God working in between the lines. You do not need to see the name of God to know that this was God's will and this was God's purpose for Esther to become the queen of the superpower nation at that point in time. Esther, a girl who was a Jewish girl from the tribe of Benjamin, to become the queen of Persia. And I pray that we may allow God to lead us to experience such favor before men. There's nothing impossible with God. You remember earlier in the first chapter we looked and we said King Xerxes had power, he had prestige, he had property. Basically that guy was on top. But here comes a girl, an orphan, a girl who is in captivity there. She comes and she finds favor in the eyes of all she sees and ends up becoming a queen. And I pray for you listening to me today and for myself that we will experience this favor, not because of anything we have done, but because of the God we serve. That you will go before men and you will experience favor beyond favor. And I pray that as we do so, we will continually surrender to God. Because for us who are believers, we know that it's God working. So we'll continually trust in God. And so that's the end of our reflection of chapter 2. And again, I hope and I pray that you take time to read this story on your own. As we do these reflections, of course, we don't get to do verse by verse, word by word, but you will see the working of the story as you read it. So be blessed and see you in the next episode. Barikiwa sana.